She thought because she drove a white BMW X5 and ran the homeowners association, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas the deed is king, and I had the oldest one in the county. I spent $52,000 on concrete just to watch her life fall apart. And honestly, it was worth every single blessed penny. The first time I laid eyes on Cynthia Halloway, she was a cloud of dust and entitlement, barreling down my private access road. It wasn't a road, not really. It was a packed earth track my granddaddy had carved out with a tractor back in the 40s, a shortcut between the north and south pastures of Riverside Ranch. My family had worked these 50 acres since before the Second World War, raising Angus cattle that were the pride of the county. The land wasn't just property. It was a testament, a living history written in sweat and soil. That dirt track was as much a part of me as the calluses on my hands. Her BMW, a gleaming white monstrosity that looked like it would get stuck in a puddle, slid to a halt just feet from my fence line, kicking up a rooster tail of gravel that peppered the side of my old Ford F-250. I was mending a stretch of barbed wire, the sun beating down on the back of my neck, the familiar rhythm of the work, a comfortable meditation. Her horn blared, a shrill European sound completely alien to the lowing of cattle and the cry of hawks. I finished twisting a wire stay, set my pliers down deliberate-like, and turned to face her. She rolled down her window, a pair of sunglasses the size of dinner plates perched on her nose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of fake politeness that sets your teeth on edge. "Could you possibly move your livestock? They seem to be blocking the road." I took off my hat, wiped the sweat from my brow with my forearm, and pointed a thumb back at the 100-odd head of Angus heifers grazing peacefully about 50 yards away, nowhere near the track. "Ma'am, my cows are in the pasture where they belong, and this here," I said, gesturing to the dirt path under her expensive tires, "is not a road. It's my driveway." A little smirk played on her lips. "Oh, bless your heart. No, this is the access easement for the estates at Willow Creek. I'm Cynthia Halloway, the HOA president." She said HOA president like it was a title on par with a 4-star general. "We'll be your new neighbors." I'd seen the construction. They'd bought the old Miller place, scraped it clean, and were packing in McMansions so close together you could pass a cup of sugar from window to window. They'd called it the estates at Willow Creek, which was funny because the only willows were on my property, and the creek had dried up in the 70s. "Pleasure to meet you, Ms. Halloway. I'm Clay Mercer." I put my hat back on. "And I'm afraid you've been misinformed. There's no easement on this tract. This is private property, part of Riverside Ranch. The county road is a half-mile back the way you came." Her smile tightened. It was like watching a snake try to look pleasant. "I assure you, our developer secured all necessary access points. This road is listed as a community amenity in our promotional materials, a charming rustic path for our residents." "Well, your developer and your promotional materials are wrong," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "I own this land, free and clear. The deed goes back to 1940. I'd appreciate it if you'd use the public road from now on. Your vehicle's kicking up dust that's not good for my herd's grazing." She let out a little condescending laugh. "We'll see about that. My lawyer will be in touch with your people." She rolled up her window, spun her car around with a shower of dirt, and sped off, leaving the scent of expensive perfume and exhaust fumes hanging in the Texas air. I watched her go, a knot tightening in my gut. This wasn't the last I'd hear from her. Not by a long shot. My wife, Sarah, always said I had a sixth sense for trouble, and right then it was screaming. Sarah was a nurse over at the county hospital, a woman with more common sense and quiet strength in her little finger than Cynthia Halloway had in her whole body. When I came in that evening smelling of dust and cow, she took one look at my face and knew. "What happened?" she asked, handing me a glass of iced tea. I told her about the new HOA president and her white BMW. "She thinks she owns my driveway, Sarah. Called it a community amenity." Sarah sighed, leaning against the kitchen counter. She'd grown up in the city, but had taken to ranch life like a duck to water. She understood what this land meant. Did you show her the survey map? Didn't get that far. She was too busy threatening me with her lawyer. I grumbled, taking a long swallow of tea. She's one of those. The kind of person who thinks a hefty price tag on their house gives them a claim to everything they can see from their porch. Be careful, Clay, she warned. People like that don't fight fair. They don't understand boundaries. I've got the deed, I said, as if that were a holy scripture that could ward off evil. The deed is king. The next day I went into town and bought the heaviest duty chain and padlock they had at the hardware store. I strung it across the entrance to the track from the main road, right between two sturdy oak posts my grandfather had set in concrete 60 years prior. I also hammered in a new sign, professionally printed this time, big and red. Private property. Riverside Ranch. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. It felt solid. Definitive. It lasted less than 24 hours. I came out the next morning to find the chain cut clean through with bolt cutters lying in the dust. The padlock was gone, and there, pressed into the dirt, were the unmistakable, wide tire tracks of a BMW X5. She hadn't just trespassed. She'd committed criminal destruction of property. I stood there, the two ends of the severed chain in my hands, and felt a cold, hard anger settle deep in my chest. This wasn't about a misunderstanding anymore. This was a declaration of war. I called the sheriff's department. Deputy Miller, a young guy whose dad I'd known for years, came out. He looked at the cut chain, whistled, and took my report. You got any idea who did it, Clay? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The whole county was buzzing about the new fancy development. New HOA president, woman named Cynthia Halloway, drives a white BMW. Thinks this is her personal shortcut. Miller sighed and pushed his hat back. We'll go have a talk with her, but Clay, you know how this goes. Without a witness or a camera, it's your word against hers. She'll just deny it. He was right, of course. When Miller came back later that afternoon, he had a weary look on his face. She claims the chain was an illegal obstruction of a public right-of-way. Said she had every right to remove it. Her lawyers already called the sheriff, talking about harassment. Harassment? On my own land? I was incredulous. Like I said, Clay, people like that. That's when I started my own documentation. I went back to the hardware store and bought 3 motion-activated trail cams. I mounted them discreetly in the trees overlooking the track, angled to get a perfect shot of any vehicle and its license plate. Then I went to the bank and took out a little cash. I found a guy who did fence work, a tough old bird named Gus, and paid him to install a new gate. Not a chain, but a 16-foot, heavy-gauge steel pipe gate, set on 6-foot concrete footers. We welded the hinges on so they couldn't be unbolted, and I put a case-hardened, shielded padlock on it that would laugh at a pair of bolt cutters. It was a beautiful gate. It was also a red flag to a bull. For a week, there was silence. I checked the trail cams every day. Nothing. I started to think, maybe, just maybe, she'd gotten the message. Maybe the sight of solid steel had finally penetrated that thick skull of hers. It was a foolish hope. The call came on a Tuesday. It was from one of the new homeowners in the estates, a nervous-sounding fella named Mark. Mr. Mercer, my name is Mark. I just moved into the house on lot 12, he began. Listen, I don't want to cause any trouble, but the HOA president, Ms. Halloway, is bringing a group of us on a community tour, and she's headed for that gate of yours. She's got a cordless angle grinder. My blood ran cold. She's what? An angle grinder. She's telling everyone you've illegally blocked the path and she's going to, reestablish community access? Mark, you stay back. Don't get involved. I'm on my way. I jumped in my truck and flew down the ranch road. As I got closer, I could hear it, the high-pitched scream of a grinder biting into steel. I rounded the last bend and saw the scene. Cynthia, dressed in pristine white slacks and a blazer, safety glasses perched on her forehead, but not over her eyes, was carving a trench into my new gate. A shower of sparks was flying. narrowly missing the hood of her precious BMW parked right next to it. A small group of about 5 prospective buyers and new residents stood behind her, looking deeply uncomfortable. I slammed on the brakes, got out of my truck, and didn't bother to close the door. "Halloway!" I roared. The sound that came out of me was something primal, the kind of bellow I used to call in a bull from a mile away. She jumped, the grinder slipping and scoring a deep gash across the gate. She shut it off, the sudden silence deafening. She turned, a triumphant, ugly look on her face. "Well, look who's here," she said, her voice loud for the benefit of her audience. "Mr. Mercer, I'm simply removing this illegal blockade from our community's rightful path." I walked slowly toward her, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. I stopped about 10 feet away. "Get off my property now." "This isn't your property," she screeched, her composure starting to crack. "This is an easement. I have the paperwork." "No, you don't," I said, my voice dangerously quiet now. "You have a sales brochure with a bunch of lies in it. I have a deed, a survey, and a sheriff who is getting very tired of your phone calls. I am giving you one final warning. Leave this gate, this road, and my family alone. Do not come back on this land again." To the little group of people, I said, "Folks, I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. This woman is selling you a bill of goods. This is a private ranch, and you're all currently trespassing. I suggest you leave before I have the sheriff escort you out." One of the men, probably Mark, cleared his throat. "Cynthia, maybe we should just go. This doesn't feel right." Her face flushed a blotchy red, humiliated in front of the very people she was trying to impress. "Don't listen to him. He's just some dumb redneck trying to intimidate us." That was it. The insult to my way of life. The sheer, unadulterated venom. But I held my temper. A cold, calculating part of my brain took over. Let her dig her own grave. I pulled out my phone. "Fine. I'm calling the sheriff. We'll sort this out right now." I started dialing. Her eyes went wide. She knew what the deputy had told her last time. Another call wouldn't go well for her. "Fine. This isn't over," she shrieked. She threw the angle grinder into the back of her BMW, jumped in, and tore off, leaving her flock of potential buyers standing in the dust, looking confused and angry. I had a feeling her community tour was officially over. After they had all sheepishly departed, I inspected the gate. She'd managed to cut about halfway through one of the main bars. It was fixable, but the audacity of it was breathtaking. I went and retrieved the footage from the trail cam. Perfect, high-definition video of Cynthia Halloway, in her stupid blazer, committing felony vandalism on my property. I saved the file. It was the second of what would become a very, very large collection. I now had her on video for 2 separate crimes, and she was just getting started. The real crisis, the one that would turn this from a feud into a holy war, was still to come. The next few weeks fell into a tense, ugly pattern. Cynthia Halloway, having failed to physically break through, began a campaign of bureaucratic warfare. It started with a formal-looking letter from her lawyer, a slick downtown Dallas firm. It was full of blustering legal jargon about prescriptive easements, rights of public access, and demands that I immediately remove the unlawful obstruction or face a civil lawsuit. I took it to my own lawyer, a crusty old country attorney named Bill Peterson, who'd handled my family's affairs for 30 years. Bill read the letter, took off his glasses, and chuckled. "Clay, this is what we in the legal profession call a whole lot of nothing. They're trying to scare you. A prescriptive easement requires years of open, notorious, and unopposed use. This track has been gated on and off for 70 years. They don't have a leg to stand on." He tapped the letter, but the fact they're spending money on these Dallas sharks tells me she's desperate. "What do we do?" I asked. "We write back," Bill said with a grin. "We send them a certified copy of your deed, the 1940 survey plat, and a polite letter telling them to go pound sand. We also include a bill for the damaged gate and a warning that any further trespassing will be met with the full force of the law." So that's what we did. The response from her lawyer was stony silence, but Cynthia herself was far from silent. The real escalation began one hot afternoon in late July. I was moving a herd of about 50, including several heavily pregnant heifers, from the south pasture to the north. This involved herding them across that very same dirt track she coveted. It was a slow, delicate process. You don't rush pregnant cattle, especially not my prize Angus stock. One of my best heifers, a gentle giant I called Duchess, was due any day. She was worth upwards of 10 grand, and her calf, sired by my prize bull, Big Jim, would be worth another 5. We were halfway across the track, a slow-moving river of black hide, when I heard it. The whine of an engine being pushed too hard. It was the white BMW, appearing over the rise. She must have come in from the other end of the property, where the fencing was older. She saw the herd blocking her path, and instead of stopping, she laid on the horn. That god-awful shrill European horn blared across the peaceful pasture. Cows are prey animals. A sudden, loud noise like that spells one thing to them: danger. The herd panicked. They bolted, a chaotic, thundering stampede. Calves were separated from their mothers, and the heavily pregnant heifers scrambled for purchase on the uneven ground. I saw Duchess, my big, gentle Duchess, try to turn too quickly. Her legs went out from under her. She went down hard, with a terrible bellow of pain and fear. Something inside me snapped. I sprinted toward the car, waving my arms, screaming words I hadn't used since I was a young, dumb kid in a bar fight. Cynthia slowed, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. She thought this was funny. "Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash!" She screamed this through the closed window as her BMW barreled past the downed heifer, missing her by inches. I didn't even watch her go. I ran to Duchess. She was struggling to get up, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her side was scraped raw where she'd fallen, and one of her back legs was bent at an unnatural angle. But the worst part, the thing that made my heart plummet into my boots, was the telltale sign that the trauma had sent her into premature labor. It took me and my ranch hand, Carlos, 2 hours to get her into a transport sling and back to the barn. The vet came out, a good man named Doc Evans. He did what he could. He set her leg, a bad break that would likely end her breeding career. But the calf was too early. It was born that night, small and weak, and it didn't survive the hour. I stood there in the barn, the smell of hay and medicine and loss thick in the air, and looked at the empty space where a new life should have been. I looked at Duchess, my $10,000 prize heifer, now crippled, all because of a woman who wanted to save 3 minutes on her commute. That was the moment the polite warnings ended. That was the moment Clay Mercer, the patient rancher, died, and someone colder, more calculating, was born. I walked back to the house, my boots heavy with mud and grief. Sarah was waiting on the porch. She saw the look on my face, and her own crumpled. "The calf?" she whispered. I just shook my head. She came and wrapped her arms around me, and I stood there stiff as a fence post, the anger a solid, hot block in my chest. "She honked at them, Sarah, on purpose." "I'm so sorry, Clay." "Sorry isn't going to cut it," I said, my voice flat. "This is done. No more warnings. No more conversations. I'm going to end this." Sarah pulled back and looked me in the eye. She saw the new hardness there. She nodded slowly. "You're planning something," she said. "Good." That was all I needed. The next morning, I was a man on a mission. First, I called Bill, my lawyer. I told him what happened. The rage in my voice was so palpable that for a moment, he was silent on the other end of the line. "Clay, are you okay?" he finally asked. "I'm fine, Bill. But this woman just cost me $15,000 in a prize bloodline. This has moved beyond a property dispute. This is a personal attack. I want to ruin her." "Okay, son," Bill said, his voice turning serious. "Let's be smart about it. The dead calf is tragic, but it's hard to prove intent in court. What we need is to catch her in something bigger, something undeniable." That's when the pieces started clicking into place. Her desperation, the Dallas lawyers, the lies about the easement, the community amenity line. That's when I got a visit from Eddie the mailman. Eddie had been delivering mail in this part of the county for 40 years. He knew everyone and everything. He pulled his little mail truck up to my box as I was heading out. "Clay, got a minute?" he asked, leaning out his window. He was holding a glossy, expensive-looking brochure. It was for the estates at Willow Creek. "What's up, Eddie?" He lowered his voice. "I shouldn't be showing you this, but you need to see it." He opened the brochure. On the inside was a map of the development. And there, clearly marked with a dotted line and labeled Exclusive Ranch Access Road, was my private tract. The text below waxed poetic about the charming country lane, perfect for morning jogs or an evening drive to watch the sunset over the pastoral landscape. "She's not just telling them about it, Clay," Eddie whispered, his eyes wide. He leaned over the fence. "She's promising them access. She's selling your road as an amenity." That's when I knew I had her. That was the bigger thing. It wasn't just trespassing anymore. It was fraud. Wire fraud, mail fraud, you name it. She was selling contracts for homes based on a material promise she had no legal right to make. If that access disappeared, every single one of those sales contracts could be voided. I spent the next 3 days at the county clerk's office. I pulled every deed, every plat map, every survey related to my property and the old Miller place, going back to the county's founding. I sat in a dusty room with a microfilm reader until my eyes burned, tracing the lineage of every boundary line, and I found it. And I found the original 1940 survey, clear as day, a solid, unbroken line marking the border of my 50 acres. No easements, no rights of way, nothing. I paid for certified copies of everything. While I was building my paper fortress, Cynthia was escalating her own attacks. A complaint was filed with the Environmental Protection Agency. An anonymous tip claimed my ranch was improperly disposing of animal waste and polluting the groundwater. A state inspector, a young woman who looked barely out of college, showed up in a government sedan. I walked her over the entire property. I showed her my manure management plan, the compost heaps that were textbook perfect, the way we rotated pastures to prevent soil degradation. I showed her the clean water in my stock tanks. She tested the well. She found nothing, absolutely nothing. "Mr. Mercer," she said, looking embarrassed, "I'm sorry to have wasted your time. This report is completely baseless. It looks like someone has a grudge against you." "You don't say," I replied dryly. A week later, it was the health department, claiming I was operating an unlicensed slaughterhouse. That one was even shorter. The inspector saw my healthy, living herd and almost laughed. Then came the lawsuit. A process server showed up at my door and handed me a thick envelope. Cynthia Halloway and the estates at Willow Creek HOA were suing me for blocking public access and seeking damages for the diminished value of their properties. I took it straight to Bill. He read it, and a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "Oh, she's done it now, Clay. She has royally screwed herself." "How's that?" "She's initiated a lawsuit. That means we get discovery. We can legally demand to see her sales contracts, her promotional materials, her correspondence with the developer. We can depose her under oath. We can ask her to produce the deed or survey that grants her the easement she claims to have. She's just handed us the gun she's going to shoot herself with." But Cynthia had one more card to play. She went to the local TV news. The story aired on the 6 o'clock broadcast. There she was, looking tearful and victimized, standing in front of my steel gate. The reporter, a kid who looked like he'd just learned to shave, told a story of a modern, vibrant community being held hostage by a stubborn, old-fashioned rancher. They showed shots of my no trespassing sign, making it look menacing. They painted me as a backwards villain, a relic of the past standing in the way of progress. They never once mentioned the dead calf, the cutlocks, the angle grinder, or the fact that I actually owned the land. I watched it, my knuckles white on the arms of my recliner. My face was a mask of stone. The lies, the public humiliation. It was the last straw. The trap was set. She'd overextended herself, committed fraud, and now filed a frivolous lawsuit. The paper war was about to end, and the physical war was about to begin. It was time to build my wall. I sat there in the dark after the news broadcast ended. The smug, lying face of Cynthia Halloway burned into my mind. The paper war was her territory. The courts, the media, the bureaucracy, that was her battlefield. She thought she could bleed me dry with lawyers and shame me into submission with reporters. She was wrong. I was going to fight this on my terms, on my land, with tools she couldn't possibly comprehend. The next morning, I drove to the bank. Deep in a savings account was what my family had always called the cattle fund. It was emergency money, built up over decades from the sale of prize bulls and calves. It was for catastrophic droughts, barn fires, or medical emergencies. It was the lifeblood of the ranch, sitting there for a rainy day. Looking out the window at the clear Texas sky, I decided this qualified. I walked up to the teller and withdrew $52,000 in cash. The weight of it in a canvas bag felt like pure, righteous purpose. My next call was to a man known only as Big Mike. Big Mike ran the largest concrete and construction outfit in 3 counties. He was a mountain of a man with a grip that could crush a coconut and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. More importantly, he had a deep and abiding hatred for entitled city folk who moved to the country and tried to change it. I met him at the diner in town. I laid it all out over coffee and chicken fried steak. The trespassing, the vandalism, the dead calf, the lawsuit, the fraud. I didn't have to embellish a thing. With every detail, his scowl deepened. So this woman, he rumbled, wiping his mouth with a napkin, is selling houses based on access to your private road. That's the long and short of it, Mike. And you want to make that road disappear. I want to make it so a tank couldn't get through, I said. I want to build a monument to the concept of private property, right where her shortcut used to be. A slow grin spread across Big Mike's face. It was a scary sight. He leaned forward, his voice a low growl. Clay, I'm going to enjoy this. What's your budget? I slid the canvas bag across the table. He didn't even look inside. That's the down payment. The total is $52,000. I want a 12-foot high, steel-reinforced concrete wall. I want it 100 feet long, completely blocking that old track. I want footers so deep you could bury a car in them. And I want a new gate in the middle of it, a solid steel plate that a truck would bounce off of. He nodded, a glint in his eye. Agricultural security barrier, he said. What? That's what we'll call it on the permit. It's for preventing livestock theft and unauthorized vehicular access to agricultural operations. It's a specific classification. An HOA can't do a damn thing about it. It's not a fence. It's a security installation, legally untouchable. He spit a stream of tobacco juice into his empty coffee cup. Even a tank ain't getting through this. The final piece of the puzzle was the timing. I'd seen the signs all over town. The estates at Willow Creek, grand opening weekend. It was scheduled for 2 weeks from now. Cynthia was planning a big shindig with food trucks, a bouncy castle for the kids, and guided tours for a new wave of potential buyers. The centerpiece of her sales pitch, I knew, would be that exclusive ranch access road. Mike, I said, leaning in, can you do it during her open house weekend? His scary grin came back, wider this time. Clay, for you? I'll have the trucks rolling at dawn that Friday. Those 2 weeks were the calm before the storm. I continued my daily chores, mending fences, checking on my herd. Duchess was slowly recovering, but she walked with a permanent limp, a constant, painful reminder of what had been taken from me. I forwarded all of Cynthia's increasingly frantic legal threats to Bill, who filed them away with a chuckle. I spent my evenings on the porch with Sarah, watching the sunset, gathering my strength. The trap was laid. The weapon was being forged. All that was left was the execution. And so, as I stood there reflecting on the sheer scale of her arrogance and the damage she'd caused, I knew I had to see this through to the end. The law was on my side, the truth was on my side, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you have to make a statement so loud and so permanent that it can't be ignored. She had pushed me, smeared my name, and killed my livestock. My revenge wouldn't just be legal, it would be concrete, literally. If you've ever been pushed to the brink by someone who thought they were above the rules, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're enjoying watching this house of cards get ready to tumble, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. The Friday of the grand opening dawned clear and bright, a perfect day for selling overpriced houses, and a perfect day for pouring concrete. At 5:30 a.m., just as the first hint of light was painting the eastern sky, I heard a low rumble. It wasn't thunder, it was the sound of progress. A convoy of heavy machinery rolled down the county road and turned onto my property, stopping well short of the disputed track. There were 2 massive concrete mixers, a flatbed carrying a backhoe, and a dozen pickup trucks filled with Big Mike's crew. They were a rough-looking bunch, all muscle and tattoos and grim determination. They looked like they were ready to invade a small country. Big Mike himself hopped out of his dually, a thermos in one hand and a set of rolled-up blueprints in the other. He gave me a nod. "Morning, Clay. Nice day for a wall." "That it is, Mike. That it is." By 6 a.m., the backhoe was roaring to life, its massive bucket tearing into the earth with ferocious efficiency. It dug a trench 4 feet wide and 6 feet deep, stretching 100 feet across the entrance to the old track. The crew moved like a well-oiled machine, laying down a complex web of thick steel rebar, creating a skeleton for the beast we were about to create. The concrete trucks arrived at dawn. The first pour began around 8 a.m., a steady stream of gray sludge filling the trench, burying the rebar, forming the unshakable foundation of my monument. The air filled with the smell of wet concrete and diesel fumes. It was the smell of victory. It was around 9:30 a.m. when she showed up. Her white BMW came screeching to a halt, a safe distance from the construction. Cynthia Halloway jumped out, dressed for her big day in a power suit and heels that immediately sank into the soft dirt. She looked from the churning concrete mixers to the deep trench to the army of men working. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then pure, unadulterated rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. Big Mike, who had been directing the pour, turned slowly. He was twice her size and looked about as friendly as a grizzly bear woken from a nap. He pointed a thick, grease-stained finger at the sign we'd posted. It was a big, official-looking sign that read, "Construction of Agricultural Security Barrier in Progress. Permit number 734-B, authorized personnel only." "Ma'am, this is an active construction site on private property. For your own safety, you need to stay back," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried easily over the noise. "Permit? You can't get a permit to block my access road," she screamed, stomping her foot, which only served to drive her expensive heel deeper into the mud. "It ain't your road, lady," one of the crew members yelled, and a few of the others laughed. "I will have you all arrested for trespassing. I will sue your company into oblivion," she threatened, pulling out her phone and frantically dialing. I just stood back by my truck, arms crossed, a small, grim smile on my face. Let her call. I had my copy of the permit from my friend at the county planning office. It was ironclad. Sure enough, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived about 20 minutes later. Cynthia ran to them, a torrent of accusations pouring out of her. The deputies listened patiently, then walked over to Big Mike. "Morning, Mike. Ma'am here says you're illegally blocking her road." Big Mike handed them the permit. The lead deputy read it again, and then looked over at the 100-foot trench. He looked at me, and I gave him a little nod. He sighed and walked back over to Cynthia. "Ma'am, they have a valid permit for an agricultural security barrier on Mr. Mercer's private property. There's nothing we can do. This is a civil matter, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave the area. It's a hazardous work site." The color drained from her face. "A civil matter? He's destroying the value of my development. My grand opening is today. People are going to be here any minute. That's not a sheriff's department issue, ma'am. Please get back in your vehicle." Defeated, she stalked back to her BMW, shooting me a look of pure hatred, a look that promised retribution. She spent the rest of the day parked a quarter-mile down the road, watching as the wooden forms for the wall went up, as the rebar cages were lifted into place by the crane. By noon, the foundation was poured. She screamed until she was purple. Her first potential buyers started arriving around lunchtime. They drove past her, parked and fuming in her car, and saw the massive construction project. They saw the concrete trucks. They saw the dead end. They'd slow down, look confused, and then drive away. Her grand opening was a catastrophic failure before it even began. By Friday afternoon, a 12-foot wall stood where her shortcut used to be. It was still encased in wooden forms, the concrete curing within, but it was a massive, undeniable presence. It was a brutalist masterpiece of spite. The crew worked all day Saturday, reinforcing, finishing, and preparing for the centerpiece, the gate. It arrived on a flatbed late in the afternoon, a single solid sheet of half-inch thick plate steel, braced and cross-braced, weighing close to a ton. That's when Cynthia made her final desperate move. She must have seen the gate being unloaded, realized this was her absolute last chance before the path was sealed forever. She got in her BMW. I saw the car start to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed, heading not for the road, but straight across the bumpy pasture directly toward the gap in the wall where the gate was about to be hung. Big Mike saw her coming. "Everyone back," he yelled. His crew scattered. She was aiming for the opening, maybe thinking she could block it with her car, or maybe she had just completely lost her mind. But she misjudged the terrain. Her front tire hit a deep rut, the one Duchess had fallen in. The BMW's suspension, designed for smooth pavement, bottomed out with a sickening crunch. The car swerved violently, its trajectory shifting. Instead of shooting the gap, the white BMW X5 plowed, at about 40 miles an hour, directly into one of the newly poured concrete support pillars of the wall. The sound was a deafening combination of screeching metal, shattering glass, and a dull, solid thump. The front end of the pristine German SUV crumpled like a tin can. The hood buckled, the engine block was shoved back into the firewall, and both front airbags deployed with a violent poof. The car was utterly, comprehensively destroyed. Silence fell over the worksite. Every single one of Big Mike's crew was staring, jaws agape. The pillar she hit? It had a small chip in it, maybe the size of a quarter. Otherwise, it was completely unharmed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's side door was shoved open and Cynthia Halloway stumbled out, a trickle of blood coming from her nose where her sunglasses had been smashed into her face. She looked at her totaled vehicle, then at the monolithic, indifferent wall, and she just started screaming, not words, just a raw animal sound of pure, helpless fury. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a single vehicle accident on my property at Riverside Ranch," I said calmly. "And you'd better send the sheriff too. The driver appears to be the same person I have a pending complaint against for vandalism." I hung up the phone. I looked at the wrecked symbol of her arrogance, a heap of twisted metal bleeding fluids onto my pasture. I looked at my wall, strong and silent and permanent, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of profound peace. The physical battle was over. All that was left was to watch her empire of lies crumble to dust, too. The aftermath of the crash was a spectacle. The sheriff arrived, along with an ambulance and a tow truck. Cynthia, after being checked out by the paramedics and refusing treatment, was forced to watch as her mangled BMW was dragged from the pasture, leaving a deep scar in the earth and a rainbow slick of oil and coolant. The deputy gave her a ticket for reckless driving and, after a long conversation with me and Big Mike, added a criminal citation for endangerment on a work site. Her insurance company, when they found out she had intentionally driven off-road and crashed into a stationary object, would later deny her claim, leaving her on the hook for the full value of the totaled vehicle. She stood there, disheveled and defeated, as the last of the emergency vehicles pulled away. The sun was setting, casting a long shadow from my beautiful new wall. It looked like a fortress wall from some ancient kingdom, her kingdom. The estates at Willow Creek was looking less grand by the second. The wall was finished by Sunday evening. Big Mike and his crew installed the monstrous steel plate gate, hung on hinges the size of my fist, and secured with a locking mechanism that came from a bank vault company. He presented me with the key, a long, complicated piece of machined steel. "She's all yours, Clay," he said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to make my teeth rattle. "Paid in full. Let me know if you need any more agricultural improvements." He and his crew packed up and rolled out, leaving behind a glorious 100-foot-long, 12-foot-high testament to what happens when you push a quiet man too far. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Cynthia. The story of her disastrous grand opening, complete with the BMW crash, spread through the county like wildfire. The few people who had put down deposits on houses started calling their lawyers. My attorney, Bill, was already on the offensive. He sent a package to every known buyer and their legal counsel. It contained a copy of my deed, the certified survey, a detailed timeline of Cynthia's harassment, photos of the cut chain and damaged gate, the vet bill for Duchess, and the crown jewel, the high-definition video of her attacking my gate with an angle grinder. The lawsuits against her started as a trickle, then became a flood. Buyers sued to have their contracts voided due to fraudulent misrepresentation. They wanted their deposits back, plus damages. The developer, a larger corporation that had partnered with her, started its own internal investigation and quickly moved to distance themselves, claiming she had acted as an independent agent and misrepresented the property's amenities to them as well. But the final nail in her coffin, the public execution, was yet to come. The perfect stage presented itself 2 weeks later, the annual county town hall meeting. It was usually a sleepy affair where folks complained about property taxes and potholes. This year, the room was packed. The local news was there, eager for a follow-up to their now infamous biased story. All the angry homebuyers from the estates were there, and Cynthia Halloway was there looking pale and drawn, trying to do damage control with the county commissioners. She was in the middle of a rambling, desperate speech about economic development and unforeseen access complications when the chairman recognized a new speaker. The chair recognizes Mr. Clay Mercer. A hush fell over the room as I walked to the podium. I wasn't wearing my dusty work clothes. I was in a clean shirt and my good boots. I carried a thick stack of papers. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice calm and steady. "My name is Clay Mercer. My family has owned Riverside Ranch, just east of town, since 1940. For the past few months, my family, my property, and my livestock have been under constant attack by this woman, Ms. Cynthia Halloway." I saw her flinch. I didn't look at her. I addressed the room. "Ms. Halloway has told you a story about a stubborn rancher blocking progress. I'm here to tell you the truth." And I laid it all out. I held up the certified copy of the 1940 deed. "This is my land. It has no easements." I held up the glossy sales brochure. "This is the lie she sold you, a promise of access she never owned." I described the cut locks, the angle grinder, the honking of the horn that led to my heifer being crippled and my calf dying. A murmur went through the crowd. "She sued me," I continued, my voice rising with cold anger, claiming I was blocking her path. "She filed false reports with the EPA and the health department, wasting taxpayer money. She went on television and slandered my name. And when all that failed, she tried to physically destroy my property and ended up destroying her own vehicle." I placed a stack of documents on the podium. I have here copies of the deed, the survey, the restraining order I now have against Ms. Halloway, and sworn affidavits from her own customers attesting to the fraudulent promises she made. I'm making them available to any member of the public or the press who is interested in the truth. The room erupted. The homebuyers were on their feet, shouting at Cynthia. The news cameras swiveled from me to her, their lights like interrogators' lamps. She was backed into a corner, her face a mask of terror. And that's when the two sheriff's deputies, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, began to walk toward her. The chief deputy had a warrant in his hand, the result of the criminal complaints filed by the buyers and the evidence provided by my lawyer. He stopped right in front of her. The entire room went silent. "Cynthia Halloway, you're under arrest for fraud." The handcuffs clicked. The sound echoed in the silent room. The cameras flashed, a blinding strobe of public humiliation, and I just stood there leaning against the podium, my work done. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched as the consequences of her own actions finally caught up with her and dragged her away. The aftermath was total. Cynthia Halloway was charged with multiple counts of felony fraud and eventually pleaded guilty to avoid a longer sentence. She served 18 months in state prison. The lawsuits bankrupted her completely. She lost everything. The estates at Willow Creek Development went into receivership. The bank that took it over had to renegotiate every contract without the promise of the ranch access road, and ended up selling the homes for a significant loss. A few of the new homeowners, the decent ones, came by my ranch in the months that followed. They apologized for the misunderstanding, for ever believing her. Mark, the man who had called to warn me about the angle grinder, brought over a bottle of whiskey. We sat on my porch, looked out at the peaceful pasture, and didn't say much. We didn't have to. Life on Riverside Ranch returned to normal. The quiet came back. The cattle grazed peacefully. Duchess's leg healed, though the limp remained, a permanent reminder. The wall stands to this day, a big, ugly, beautiful slab of concrete and steel. Sometimes, when I'm out checking the fences, I'll run a hand over its rough surface. It cost me $52,000, but it bought me peace. It bought me justice, and it stands as a permanent lesson written in concrete for anyone who thinks that in Texas, a fancy car and a loud mouth can ever beat a good deed. They say good fences make good neighbors, but sometimes you need a 12-foot concrete wall to make a felon. If you enjoyed this Pro Revenge, hit like and subscribe. Share this with anyone dealing with an HOA tyrant.